trade agreements don't help. So.
I don't.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. This is the Trade Policy Commission. I am State Senator Troy Jackson. I'm the Senate Chair of the Commission.
Senator Jackson, Representative Treat, members of the Commission, it really is a pleasure to be here. I'm John Piotti. I'm the Executive Director of Maine Farmland Trust, a statewide membership organization, 4,100 members, that works to protect farmland and support farmers and advance the future of farming in Maine. But what it means is the price paid to a dairy farmer in Maine today is determined by the world market price for powder. And if something like this trade agreement goes into effect, that is a highly vulnerable number. So long term, this could have terrible impacts on exports that would really sort of undermine our dairy industry. But short term, just the effect that it would probably have on dry powder prices will take away the only thing that is keeping the dairy industry alive right now. Their prices are horrible, but they would be that much more horrible if it wasn't for this. Now, not all of you know this, but the state of Maine has done an awful lot to support the dairy industry since 2004, when we enacted some very creative things at the legislative level. But they have been just enough that keep the industry alive. And it wouldn't take much to have that industry fall apart. This could do it. And I will just remind you of what the dairy industry means to this state. It's about 20% of our agricultural production, milk sales of about $100 million a year, but economic impact of about $525 million a year. It employs about 4,000 people. It is the only economic activity in large parts of rural Maine, and the dairy farms pay about $25 million a year in taxes to this state. That would be gone.
The TPP will drastically bring down food safety standards at home and abroad. Governments will be forced to harmonize their food safety standards to the lowest common denominator. That means soon we will all be eating imported seafood, beef, and chicken that doesn't meet even the basic U.S. standards. Transnational corporations like Monsanto are using the TPP to make it illegal to label products as containing GMOs, since it discriminates against them. Corporations have even argued that locally grown labels give unfair advantage to small domestic producers over international businesses. There goes our recently minted GMO labeling bill that we all worked so hard to enact, and even the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry's own Get Real, Get Maine labeling campaign. Under the TPP, government food procurement policies that prioritize supporting their local economies will be illegal. That means that your public universities, and I would add public schools, public hospitals, et cetera, might not be allowed to intentionally source food from local farmers, since it violates free trade terms by discriminating against foreign farms.
Even now, Canada is trying to be exempted from the USDA rule on the country of origin labeling, which is what the acronym is COOL. The law was enacted as a food safety protection measure, allowing consumers to know where their food comes from. Many other countries, as you know, have less stringent plant chemical protection and animal growth hormone regulations. This summer, several Canadian meat industry groups have filed a lawsuit to block the implementation of the COOL rule.
Fast-track authority used to pass previous international trade agreements has harmed the environment, international labor standards, food safety, and led directly to job losses. I urge you to urge Congress to reject fast-track trade authorization of the TPP and urge Congress to hold full and fair public hearings of the TPP.
Fast-track, transparency, democracy, which doesn't belong, and why? I think everybody in this room knows that the answer to that is fast track. Fast track is not transparent. Fast track is not democratic. Fast track in this case is a corporate attempt to ramrod down our throats a piece of legislation, a trade treaty, whatever they want to call it, that diminishes the quality of life for each and every one of us in this country.
Because I've been reading your assessments, and I've learned an incredible amount about how you all have been trying to protect procurement and pharmaceuticals and the way we buy them, as well as our public health regulations. So I thank you for the work you've done, and I really have confidence that you know a lot of this information. You know, we have tons of water in this state. That's a huge, scarce resource that we're going to have to really protect, and that's a common good. And that as a group that we will learn how to protect that and stand up for what's right for the state of Maine and all its citizens.
And these banners were being held up at the corner of Main and High Streets this past Sunday between 1 and 2. And we wanted them to be highly visible and to see that we were elevating this issue in specific, because peace and justice are not just about an absence of war. Although what's happening, these wars are really resource wars.
I think we're having the wrong conversation here. We're talking about eviscerating our health and our business and our imports and putting ourselves subordinate to the needs and demands of multinational corporations. What I would like to see is a lot of backbone around here, and to have, as an organization, to stand up to our state and have a representation to our U.S. Representatives in Washington to demand that this be fully transparent. How can we negotiate on something when we don't even understand what the impacts are going to be and what the details are?
More than 20 years ago, Pax Christi Maine's coordinator spoke for the Maine Fair Trade Coalition in objection to the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. It is misnamed, he said. It's less about free trade than about granting large multinational corporations an exploitation license to pit worker against worker and community against community, all to see who will work the cheapest under the worst conditions with the fewest environmental regulations.
Countries of origin, in my other big concern. I understand that the beef industry has big issues with labeling its meat as U.S. beef. I believe the dispute is still ongoing. Other countries think it's a technical barrier of trade. We are spending $3.5 million this next 5 years to promote lobster. And 69% of that $3.5 million is coming out of my wallet, along with all the other lobster fishermen, which we didn't want, but we got it jammed down our throats. So, in addition to the 69% increase in our lobster licenses, which my license cost me $900 a year without the increase. Now it's going to cost me about $1,500 a year, and it goes up and up, which is a lot of money coming out of the lobster fisherman's pocket when you're only selling your lobster for $1.95 a pound, which is an incredible price. We need to be able to promote lobster as Maine lobster, or even a U.S. lobster. We are not opposed to fair trade. In the 9 original countries of the TPPA, we imported 15,600,557 and exported 15,516,313 worth of lobster. Dollars worth of lobster in 2012. We have to be smart on these agreements, have the authority to control regulations, promote our products, and keep them safe for the customers.
Agribusiness, with its gigantic equipment, longer and longer supply chains, and miles of monoculture, are contributing to global climate change and weakening local economies and traditional community cultures. The TPP will accelerate this path to the destruction of communities and the environment.
It's like, you know, if the lowest common denominator is that you can have this level of pollution, that's just not acceptable. And especially for Maine, because our water resource is going to be the next oil. The Northeast has some of the largest potable water resource on the globe. And if we allow the lowest common denominator to regulate our water resource, we're going to end up having to import water, which is going to be a crime against the people of the planet.
I think the bottom line is that governments are designed ideally to balance the public welfare with the ability of business to operate successfully. But corporations are designed strictly to make profits. They're not designed to consider the public good. And consequently, I believe that corporations should not be empowered to control government through lawsuits. So the question I have for the federal negotiators is, will the TPP include investor state provisions that allow individual corporations to challenge environmental policies as barriers to trade?
One of the questions I have is, I've been on the Citizens Trade Policy Commission since the inception, and one of the issues that irritates me the most is the lack of transparency. But every trade agreement that has come forward since NAFTA is looking to drive every standard down to the lowest common denominator. Ask her colleagues if they could actually explain what is within the trade agreement, because the one thing that I know is I speak English, at least a version of English, and the lawyers that draft these agreements have their own language, which a lot of lawyers that aren't in the labor law field don't even understand what's in it. So one of the things I always ask my colleagues is, could someone actually please explain what is in this agreement in a manner that everyone would understand what's in the agreement?
I would just say that I'm routinely briefed by USTR, and the briefings don't always match up with the information that is leaked. And specifically, one of them has to do with whether or not the state of Maine would be bound by provisions that basically make it harder for our Medicaid program to negotiate rebates to prescription drugs. And we were told by USTR that there was no new text on that. They were operating off of a text from over a year ago. And according to the leaks, there is a new text, and I'd sure like to know what's in it. Just a question on the procurement. I've seen those same leaked charts, and the U.S. has always publicly stated that, of course, they're not willing to agree to having states and cities being bound, that they will proceed with what they have done in the most recent agreements, which is to basically have an opt-in where states can make that decision whether or not they want to be bound. Are you hearing, since you've been more closely involved, in terms of talking to negotiators and everything, do you know anything that would make me, that the U.S. might not be, in fact, sticking with that approach and might be agreeing to having procurement rules bind the states and localities?